and I'll admit everyone in a second.
Okay.
Okay. Is everyone ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. So 51 people in the waiting room. I'm gonna admit them all now. So
Why are we not seeing the slide? So can you let Ambassador Umarov know when he can start speaking, please?
I'm ready. You will start.
No, you will start, Ambassador Umarov. I was waiting for Florian.
Okay.
So can Ambassador Umarov start now?
Shall I start?
Yes, I think we can start.
Okay.
So slide can go, Florian.
Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Republic of Kazakhstan and the co-organizers of today's event, I want to welcome all of you at this open forum dedicated to the preparation of the 2021 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. I wish to thank Tariq Rauf for his initiative, and also my colleagues from Austria and Switzerland for their continuous support. We're pleased to see the platform to become a good tradition on the Vienna ground. The upcoming 10th NPT RevCon that has been postponed due to the COVID pandemic to August this year is of particular importance. As you all know, the NPT had its 50th anniversary in July 2020 and the 25th anniversary of the NPT's indefinite extension. As a cornerstone of international peace and security, NPT plays a crucial role in advancing nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Unfortunately, nuclear disarmament remains an aspiration than an action. This disbalance among three pillars of the NPT is definitely among the main challenges of the upcoming RevCon. We are glad that important treaty, the New START treaty between the Russian Federation and the United States, has been extended for 5 years to 2026. It is a very positive development. However, it needs a political will of the two sides to further progress on reducing the nuclear stockpiles for others to follow the suit. Presently, there are about 13,400 nuclear weapons in more than 100 deployment sites in 14 countries. Being a party to START 1, Kazakhstan during the 90s dismantled dozens of its ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. In order to feel safe and secure today, we, and here I mean the rest of the world, need to see the progressive development on this issue. This and other agreements served as the basis for international stability since the Cold War. We have to ensure that this architecture should not fall apart. This is a real challenge facing us in the nuclear disarmament sphere that will affect the deliberations of the RevCon 2021. This year is the 25th anniversary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We welcome the recent ratification of the treaty by Cuba and Comoros. At the same time, the fact that the CTBT has not entered into force during the quarter of the century remains a matter of deep concern. None of the CTBT Annex II states demonstrates the willingness to move forward. We believe that this is due to a lack of sufficient political will from those 8 countries and the rest of us. The success of NPT happened in 1991 when the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, made an unprecedented decision to close one of the biggest and most active testing grounds in Semipalatinsk. This made a history of the first legal ban on nuclear tests. Afterwards, other nuclear test sites fell silent, and nuclear test ban became a global phenomenon. This paved the way to the adoption of the CTBT 5 years later, in 1996. This year is of particular importance for global disarmament because it marks the 30th anniversary of closure of the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. You know, in recognition, the UN General Assembly proclaimed the 29th of August, the date of closure of the Semipalatinsk test site, as the International Day Against Nuclear Tests, in order to remember and not to forget. We all understand that a voluntary moratorium on nuclear testing observed by the nuclear powers cannot serve as an alternative to a legally binding document such as the CTBT. In this regard, in order to promote an effective implementation of the NPT, we need the CTBT Annex 2 states ratify the treaty as soon as possible and without any preconditions. In this regard, I would like to draw your attention to the initiative of the CTBT champion, the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, on creation a global alliance of leaders, GAL, for nuclear security and nuclear weapon-free world. This platform will unite world leaders, eminent people with solid nuclear background to maintain international peace and security agenda. We see this group as the one to effectively promote political will through the soft power and diplomacy. Indisputably, humanitarian and environmental impacts of nuclear testing in Semipalatinsk and other nuclear test sites clearly demonstrate that the aftermath of any use of nuclear weapons have a catastrophic nature. Any use and even existence of nuclear weapons is increasingly becoming incompatible with the international humanitarian law. The total elimination of all nuclear arsenals is the only absolute guarantee against the use or threat of use of such weapons. The nuclear powers bear the highest responsibility to save the humankind from a nuclear catastrophe. Kazakhstan leadership for the last 4 years in different multilateral platforms has been urging P5 countries to get together to resolve the issues of global concern. Lately, President of Russia has come up with the same idea. We wholeheartedly support this initiative, which is overdue. The recent entering into force of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is the clear voice of the international community to reach nuclear disarmament. It complements the NPT, especially its ultimate goal to achieve a world without nuclear weapons, according to articles. Dear colleagues, from my personal experience in the UN Security Council, I can confidently say that the lack of mutual trust and confidence is the core of current problems in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. We have to overcome it individually and collectively. We believe that the nuclear challenge on the Korean Peninsula needs to be resolved peacefully. In this regard, during its tenure in the UN Security Council, Kazakhstan has been an active part to all sanctions taken to force North Korea to act responsibly. The efforts to denuclearize North Korea by diplomatic means should be continued in earnest. There is no alternative. I cannot fail to mention the situation around JCPOA on the Iranian nuclear program. We really hope that the negotiation process that is now taking place in Vienna will lead to some positive results. We are pleased that all the parties to the agreement are showing interest in returning to the JCPOA in its original form. Kazakhstan, on its part, as a contributor to the JCPOA process, is determined to continue to work with the international community to preserve the JCPOA. This will be the successful outcome of the 2021 NPT Review. Nuclear weapon-free zones are also important parts of the global non-proliferation. By establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, together with its neighbors, delegitimized nuclear weapons in a vast region in the heart of the Eurasian continent. Although nuclear weapon-free zones now cover more than half of the world, Most of the negative security assurance protocols are still under negotiations or have not been ratified yet by one state. It includes the Simple Items Treaty. But let us keep in mind the significance of zones, because they are, in practical terms and on voluntary basis, enhance non-proliferation regime and contribute to peace and security. In this regard, the second session of the regional conference on the establishment of the weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East will definitely help to achieve a successful outcome of the NPT. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to touch upon briefly on the third pillar of the NPT, peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Iaea safeguards, nuclear safety and nuclear security are continuing to be the areas for further improvement. Today, some member states, without joining to the fundamental nuclear safety and security instruments, are planning to build a nuclear facility on their territory. Taking into account the Fukushima nuclear accident that happened 10 years ago, the serious attention should be paid to ensuring an adequate level of nuclear safety standards, especially for the newcomers. The technical assistance of the agency and the current new Zodiac initiative create positive environment to ensure the successful outcome of the upcoming RevCon. Dear participants, Kazakhstan is proud of its achievements and contributions to make the world a safer place from nuclear dangers. As the world's biggest supplier of uranium products, my country supported the IAEA initiative to establish the low-enriched uranium bank on its territory. We believe that this unique facility is another practical input into the success of 2021 NPT RevCon. Kazakhstan wishes to see the 10th NPT Review Conference to be held in an atmosphere of cooperation and constructive dialogue for state parties to work cooperatively to develop and agree on a final document. To this end, my delegation will assist Ambassador Gustavo Zlauvinen, president-designate of the 10th NPT Review Conference, in his preparations to ensure a successful outcome. I look forward to our important exchange of views today, focusing on possible recommendations for the outcome document of the review conference. Now I would like to pass the floor to Tariq. He will explain some administrative matters and moderate the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Umarov. Thank you very much for your introductory comments. I would also like at the beginning to thank you, Ambassador Alexander Kement and the Austrian mission, as well as Ambassador Benno Lagner and the Swiss mission for co-sponsoring this event. This is the fourth or fifth such discussion that we have organized over the previous years. This year, for the first time, this is an online discussion given the continuing pandemic and is branded for participation by the Vienna-based permanent missions, as well as the staff of the IAEA, the CTBTO, and the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs. We are recording this session. All of the speakers have been requested to focus specifically on elements that could form part of the final document for the NPT Review Conference whenever it is held. This Zoom meeting is being facilitated through Atomic Reporters. For those of you who don't know me, I was the former head of verification and security policy at the IAEA, and also the alternate head of the IAEA NPT delegation. Atomic Reporters is a Canadian registered NGO operating in Austria as a non-governmental international organization under the rules of the Austrian Foreign Ministry. So we will have questions and answers later on in the chat session. And I will now invite Ambassador Gustavo Zlauvinen, who is the president-designate of the upcoming NPT Review Conference, to hear from him what are his expectations, and also he will benefit, I think, from the views of the Vienna mission as we go along the discussion today. So Gustavo, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Tariq. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking the permanent missions of Austria, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland to the international organizations in Vienna for co-organizing this very important event, and to you, Tariq, for arranging it. All three state parties have been committed, supported to the NPT, and more broadly, to the goal of achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. I would also like to take the opportunity to express my sympathy and solidarity for all those who have suffered through this terrible pandemic. COVID-19 continues to take the lives of thousands and upend the lives of millions. It is also a reminder how similarly low probability threats, such as a new pathogen for the use of nuclear weapons, can become all too real, all too quickly. Now, before turning to the substance of the treaty and the potential issues to be discussed at the review conference, I want to briefly touch on the question that is at the forefront of everyone's mind. Will the review conference be held in August as planned? As I have said before, ensuring the review conference can proceed as planned depends on developments related to the pandemic in New York and worldwide, as well as regarding the status of operations at the UN headquarters. The situation is still extremely fluid, and how the world will look in August remains unclear. I will hold consultations with state parties in May, at the beginning of May, on these exact questions, with the aim of having a decision on whether to proceed as planned. I should also know that this issue is not one that is unique to New York. It is the same across all UN headquarters, including in Geneva and Vienna. Whether the review conference is held, it will not change the context within which it is being held. The risk posed by nuclear weapons, their proliferation and their potential use, are growing as a result of the ratcheting up of competition between those states that possess them because of similar regional tensions and due to historic achievements in science and technology that are redefining armed conflict and concepts of deterrence. It may no longer be the 50th anniversary of the NPT's entry into force this year, but we must all remain mindful of the fact that this treaty has helped keep the world safe for more than half a century. It is all of our responsibility to ensure that it continues to do so for as long as it is needed. A meaningful conclusion to the 10th review conference will be important for doing so. To this end, I continue to undertake extensive virtual consultations with state parties in capitals, New York, Geneva, and Vienna. I've also met virtually with cross-regional groups and individual states. Additionally, the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, together with partners such as the Iaea, has been holding a series of virtual events to provide a forum for other stakeholders, including NGOs, industry, and academia, to engage in dialogue on how to achieve success. These events have, to a large extent, also focused on how to hold an inclusive review conference. This is an idea that I thoroughly endorse because I believe that a plurality of views helps produce lasting results. In the context of the review conference, it means providing equitable and meaningful participation for women, space for civil society to express their views, and an opportunity for industry to participate, as well as a platform for the younger generations to have their say. Despite the fluidity surrounding the conference postponement, many state parties have taken the opportunity to engage on issues of substance. Indeed, perhaps the only upside from the pandemic has been the opportunity for enhanced engagement. Having said that, I do not expect that final positions will be known until the conference itself, given the shifting nature of international affairs right now. Nevertheless, my consultations have revealed an ongoing commitment to the treaty and its goals, with a desire for an outcome that emphasizes balance and the mutually reinforcing nature of the three pillars: disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. A majority of states have expressed concerns about the negative trends in the South. Many have stressed the urgency of measures to reduce nuclear risks, especially those at the intersections of technology and nuclear weapons. At the same time, other states have cautioned that any risk reduction measures need to be directly linked to concrete progress in disarmament and not a mere substitute for it. Others have cited the need for greater transparency by the nuclear weapons states and commitments to further reduction in nuclear arsenal. There have been numerous calls for all state parties to reaffirm the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons and to preventing any use of such weapons. Linked to these are increased concerns about the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and additionally, how to deal with the TPNW. There has been strong support for the conference to advocate for the entry into force of the CTBT and negotiations on an FMCT, as well as strengthened and legally binding approaches to negative security assurance. Charting a pathway forward in disarmament will therefore be an important goal for the Review Conference. Proliferation concerns remain a sensitive topic too for many state parties. It has been repeatedly noted that circumstances around the JCPOA on Iran's nuclear program are moving too fast to predict how it will impact the Review Conference, although calls for all parties to return to full compliance retain a strong support. On the issue of North Korea, the need for complete, verifiable, and irreversible disarmament of its program is a priority for state parties, and thus the calls for a diplomatic solution for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Perhaps not surprisingly, state parties have also been focused on regional issues, primarily the implementation of the long unfulfilled 1995 resolution on the Middle East. Progress on this issue is essential for many state parties, with some noting the link to the 2019 UN General Assembly mandated conference, and others to the universalization of the NPT. It is apparent that recognition of the 1995 resolution and the need for urgent progress will once again be important to success at the Review Conference. There has also been a substantial and I believe unprecedented focus on the peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology and their connection to the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. There is a growing recognition of how valuable developments in this sphere are to health, agriculture, and climate change, and many others, and how much importance state parties place upon them. I have heard significant support for exploring what the NPT can do to strengthen facilitation of access to peaceful uses while supporting and adding value to the work of the IAEA. Finally, strengthening safeguards in the face of mounting proliferation challenges caused by technological developments and regional conflicts remains a priority for many state parties. There remains much support for universalization of the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement and for all relevant states to adopt the modified Small Quantities Protocol. Debates continue over voluntary versus required measures in terms of the safeguards standard, but there seems to be confidence that common ground can be reached. I hope that state parties will use the Review Conference to discuss the changing drivers of proliferation and how to address them. Now, perhaps the loudest theme I have heard throughout my consultations relates to the status of commitments undertaken at previous review conferences and, for the most part, on the failure to implement them. This is especially the case for those related to Pillar 1. I have heard many calls for the need to strengthen accountability for the enhanced implementation of the commitments, including through measures such as benchmarks or compulsory reporting. It is worth noting that part of the NPT's enduring success rests on the commitments its state parties have undertaken in good faith. Resolving this issue is central not only to the 10th Review Conference, but I believe to the future of the treaty. No doubt those who have heard me speak before will be tired of hearing me say that it is not my responsibility to devise an outcome to the Review Conference. But it is a fact that this is entirely the purview of state parties. Having said that, and based on my consultations, it does seem as though that there is much to draw on. I hope that state parties will now focus on flexibility and compromise for the sake of our common good. I trust they will continue to work to narrow divergences and expand common ground. As the great Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "Where people of goodwill get together and transcend their differences for the common good, peaceful and just solutions can be found, even for those problems which seem most intractable." Close quotation. The issues at the core of this treaty are of consequence to the entire international community. It is therefore the responsibility of state parties, on behalf of the global population, to ensure the NPT is fit for purpose and able to meet rising challenges. I look into working with you all as we seek to utilize the 10th NPT Review Conference to advance this cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. That was a very comprehensive statement. I'm sure states parties will be very relieved to hear that you have things under control, and you touched upon all the three pillars, as well as the regional issues, as well as the administrative issue of the holding of the conference. As we are running a little bit behind time, I will move on to the next session, if that's okay with you. I wanted to remind people who have joined a little bit late that this session is being recorded. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat session and we will pick them up for the general discussion. So the next item on our agenda is the strengthened review process, which is normally what we discuss in this meeting, where I remind those who already know about it and inform those who might not be familiar with the review process, which is why I sent all the participants who had registered my presentation online, but I will do a very short presentation on the strengthened review process. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is the first treaty that had a review process. This review process was modified in 1995 when the NPT was extended indefinitely, and it clarified the mandate of the review conference, which is to review the period just passed. So for this conference, we are reviewing the period from 2015 to 2020, and to make recommendations for the implementation of the treaty and other commitments reached at previous review conferences over the next 5-year period, culminating in the 2025 review conference. The agenda, as you would know, for the review conference is to review the operation of the treaty, as well as the decisions and resolution of 1995, the document of the 2000 NPT Review Conference, and the 64 actions that were agreed at the 2010 NPT Review Conference. Given the wrought political situation today, there are differing views on whether this review conference should aim for a traditional final document that has a part on the review of the treaty, and as I mentioned, and a part looking forward for the next 5 years. People have suggested other formats, such as a bunch of decisions or resolutions, a ministerial declaration, given that we are commemorating the 50th anniversary of the treaty, or a presidential statement, or a factual statement on the state of the NPT, or a compilation of the reports of the 3 main committees and the subsidiary bodies. So those are various proposals that are up for discussion, and we will see what happens when the review conference takes place. But from my point of view, the mandate of the review conference is to try to have a negotiated final document, that is adopted by consensus. In the NPT, there is no agreed meaning of consensus. What it really means, according to tradition, is an understanding that consensus is achieved in the absence of any objection being voiced, which means not everyone would agree to every word in the final document, but they do not object to it to the extent of not having it adopted by the review conference. Since the 2015 review conference was not successful, in my view, we have a responsibility to show the utmost flexibility in trying to work to have an agreed outcome at the 10th NPT review conference. Also, there is a tendency to make the final documents very long, over 150 paragraphs or so. I'd like to remind you that it costs states parties $3 per word for every word that is put out in the official documents. So the longer the document, the more difficult it is to agree to it, and also the cost is also increasing. Finally, in my view, the review process of the treaty is not broken. What we need is more flexibility. We need to restore civility in discourse. In recent years, the discourse between the nuclear weapon states, the non-nuclear weapon states, and some others has become quite fraught. We need to restore civility. We need to listen with respect. Also, I think we might consider, as Ambassador Zlauvinen has indicated, to have more technical presentations in the main committees from the nuclear weapon states on what they have done on disarmament, from the non-nuclear weapon states, from the technical organizations like the Iaea and the CTBTO, also from nuclear industry as it relates to civil nuclear industry, and nuclear safety and security. Finally, I personally am not a supporter of small backroom discussions because it leaves the vast majority of the NPT states parties sitting around, hanging around, whereas some negotiations are taking place in the back. And I might remind you that the final compromises in 2000, which is the only case where a fully fledged final document was agreed, took place in the big room, because in the big room where other delegations are present, it is very difficult for those delegations that are being difficult in the small room and defending points that are unique to them. So my advice to Ambassador Zlauvinen, it depends what the situation will be during the conference, is to try and have the discussions on the final document in as inclusive a manner as possible. And finally, although I don't want this particular item to be discussed here, I have been suggesting that we might postpone this conference to 2022 and move it to Vienna, because two pillars of the NPT, safeguards and peaceful uses, have always been here. And with the CTBTO, we also have one part of nuclear disarmament. You have my presentation, and I'd be happy to engage with you offline after this. So I don't see any questions in the chat. So I would now like, again, given our time constraints, to move on now directly to Ambassador Alexander Kement, who is the director of the Disarmament Office at the Austrian Foreign Ministry. Could we have Ambassador Kement now, please?
Thank you very much, Tariq. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, Excellencies. It's a pleasure to co-sponsor this event with partners, and it's a pleasure for me to participate in this discussion on how to promote a successful outcome for the review conference. I will address Pillar 1, nuclear disarmament, which is of course a particularly difficult aspect of the NPT. My comments are made in a personal capacity, also to facilitate maybe a more open discussion afterwards. Firstly, I would say that I think for anyone who cares about the NPT and the multilateral disarmament and non-proliferation regime, the key issue for the upcoming review conference should be to preserve the treaty, the NPT, its credibility and its cohesion. And they are challenged on several fronts. And I believe the international community should aim to send a strong signal of recommitment to the NPT and its full implementation in all its aspects. Multilateralism is overall not in a very good state, and there are many disconcerting developments also in the disarmament and non-proliferation regime. So preservation and recommitment to the NPT should be an important sort of guiding star to keep in mind at the review conference. And when it comes to Pillar 1, nuclear disarmament, this means, in my view, to preserve and to recommit to the nuclear disarmament obligation of Article 6 and to the commitments to implement Article 6 that were agreed to by consensus in 1995, 2000, and 2010. In 2015, we did not reach a final document, and the ostentative reason for this was, as you all know, the Middle East. But I would like to say that the negotiations on Pillar 1 were also equally difficult, and no agreement or consensus was reached on these aspects either. So the last set of commitments that was agreed upon by all sides in the NPT was the 2010 NPT Action Plan, which not only remains dismally unimplemented as far as nuclear disarmament is concerned, but regrettably, we've also seen steps being taken or being announced that run counter to these commitments and even reverse some of these commitments. And I would just like to recall Action 1 of the 2010 Action Plan, which talks about the commitment to pursue for policies that are fully compatible with the treaty and the objective of achieving a world without nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, we are not necessarily moving in the direction of policies compatible with the objective of achieving a world without nuclear weapons. So there's clearly a need for the NPT Review Conference to recommit to these past agreements. And if we look at the 2010 Action Plan and also the previous agreements, they have, of course, been heavily qualified. As Ambassador Zlauvinen mentioned, they lacked timelines and benchmarks, so they were deliberately vague. And this is something that we should aim to address at the review conference as well. There are widespread concerns about current trends and how they are compatible with the objective of a world without nuclear weapons. For instance, the nuclear modernization programs, a qualitative nuclear arms race that we see already, also some increases in arsenals in some nuclear armed states, doctrinal changes towards more use of nuclear weapons and more usable nuclear weapons. There's dangerous rhetoric, there's lack of transparency. So there's much to do. So the second important signal the NPT RevCon should send, in my view, would be to reinforce a nuclear taboo, such as it exists. A clear commitment along the lines of the Reagan-Gorbachev joint statement that a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought would be such an important message. And lack of an agreement on something as fundamental and basic as this would be very disconcerting. The third element of topics was also mentioned by Ambassador Zlauvinen is the issue of humanitarian consequences and risks of nuclear weapons, and of course also the TPNW. Even though the 2015 review conference did not achieve consensus, I would like to recall that the discussion on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons was maybe the most intensely debated issue. And 159 states parties of the NPT delivered a joint statement expressing deep concern about the humanitarian impact and risks of nuclear weapons. These weapons are seen as an existential threat by the vast majority of states, and the risks that these weapons pose are borne by all. And these concerns have not gone away, and if anything, given the trends of the past few years, they have increased. So it will be important for the review conference to address these concerns about the consequences and risks of these weapons. Nuclear risk reduction was mentioned. That's, of course, a very important aspect. But as was said also, this is not a substitute for progress on nuclear disarmament. It's rather an obligation of all of us, but in particular of those states that possess these weapons. It's encouraging that there's more discussion about these risk issues, risk dimension, but this should also be a broad and inclusive discussion. Nuclear risk reduction is not limited to reducing strategic risks only, which of course is very important, but it should also be about assessing and reducing the risks that come with the possession of nuclear weapons and the very practice of nuclear deterrence, including, as was also mentioned, in light of the significant challenges posed by new technologies. And on the TPNW, the treaty has now entered into force in January, so it's a reality in international law. It is, and that has been pointed out on countless occasions by states parties and states supportive of the TPNW, it is fully complementary with the NPT, and it's supportive of the NPT treaty goals of both nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So it is a significant development that took place in the last review cycle and should thus be clearly reflected in the NPT Review Conference. Nevertheless, it's also been made clear that several states are currently not supportive of the TPNW and do not intend to join the treaty. And I think it should not be beyond the diplomatic skills of delegates to agree on a formulation that factually addresses these points. But I would like to say that it's also important how this issue is being framed. And the appropriate framing, in my view, should be how the NPT Review Conference can reflect the concerns of the overwhelming majority of NPT states parties that have been expressed in the TPNW. But irrespective of whether or not states support the legal dimension of the TPNW, the treaty is based on a set of arguments around humanitarian consequences and risks, which raise very important and very legitimate questions, which are of high relevance for the NPT. So for me, it's important for the future of the international discourse on nuclear weapons and of the NPT, but also other fora, to what extent we can find a way to have a meaningful discussion and meaningful engagement on these issues. It would be important for the NPT Review Conference to take some tangible steps towards such a constructive engagement around the issue of humanitarian consequences and risks of nuclear weapons, sustainability of international security architecture built around nuclear deterrence, and compatibility of nuclear weapons with international humanitarian law. Yeah, such a constructive engagement would be very important. I think there's some hope for the NPT has been brought in by the very important extension of the New START Treaty, as was said. It was, of course, crucially important and will hopefully pave the way for broader follow-on agreements. CTBT was mentioned, of course, also. And there's also some optimism. I think that the overall atmosphere at the review conference may be a bit more conducive and constructive than would have been the case a few months ago. So I close with repeating broad support for the NPT and cohesion around this crucial treaty desperately needs some credible progress on Pillar 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Clement, for addressing nuclear disarmament issues, including also the TPNW. One very quick question before we move on to our next speaker. At review conferences, some of the nuclear weapon states have provided technical briefings on what they have done under New START or other agreements, but they have done this in side meetings rather than during the discussions in the main committee itself or during the subsidiary body. In your view, would it be more useful for such briefings to be done within the work of the main committee so that there can be some engagement with the states parties as well, rather than as a side event outside the work of the main committee?
Well, thanks for the question. Of course, side events are very useful, interested, and to be welcomed. There's no question about it. But I agree. In a way, I want to come back to the point that you made around the small group meetings. I think part of what we've seen in the discussion in recent years is this very clear recognition by and the call by non-nuclear weapon states, by the vast majority of NPT states parties, that all issues around nuclear weapons are of broad and shared concern, and the debate needs to be more inclusive and more broad. So it would be, coming from that mindset, it would make a lot of sense to bring in a lot more of these discussions into the formal settings of the the NPT, which of course has the potential downside of them being politicized, but nevertheless, this is a treaty of states parties, and everything related to nuclear weapons is of concern to all states parties. So I would second what I guess is your leading question, that bringing more of those substantive issues around nuclear weapons practices into the formal structures would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Another advantage would be it would form part of the official record of the meeting, whereas side events do not have any record. So now we would like to move on to Pillar 2. And I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Unut Susno, who's the head of the section in the Iaea's Office for Legal Affairs for Non-Proliferation Policy. I'm also very pleased that when I was at the agency, he was also a member of the Iaea's NPT delegation, and he served as the secretary to the chair of Main Committee 2 working on safeguards issues. So Unut,
thank you very much, Tariq, for the introduction. I would like to congratulate the permanent mission of Austria, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland, and of course you personally, Tariq, for organizing this event. So I would address Pillar 2, safeguards, but more from the agency perspective. As you know, the agency has participated in all NPT review conferences since the first one organized in 1975. However, under the rules of procedures, the agency does not participate in the decision-making process or submits recommendations to be included in the outcome documents. And of course, that is an exclusive right that is reserved for states parties to the treaty. The Director General of the Iaea has addressed all NPT review conferences during the general debates and outlined the most important developments in the agency's activities in the relevant areas, in particular safeguards and technical cooperation. And our Director General will continue to address the review conference and apprise the states parties on relevant developments. As Tariq mentioned, so the agency seconded a number of officials for the PrepComs, but also the review conference who served as Secretariat for Main Committee 2, and I did it twice for 2010 and 2015. And of course, the focus is on the review of the implementation of Article 3 of the treaty, and this will continue. The Iaea has submitted background papers to all review conferences on its activities in connection with Article 3 on safeguards and Article 4 nuclear cooperation. And the Iaea papers have been prepared under the authority of the Director General and submitted for publication as conference documents. We did prepare background papers for the 2020, but of course now we have to update those documents in light of the developments. The background paper on safeguards has traditionally provided a comprehensive overview of the agency's verification activities since the previous review cycle and included useful information on the conclusion of safeguards, comprehensive safeguards agreements and additional protocol, including information about the agency's outreach efforts to promote the conclusion of comprehensive safeguards agreements, additional protocol, as well as amendments or rescission of the small quantities protocol. They included information about safeguards implementation and safeguards implementation issues that have been encountered in between the review cycles. Development and implementation of state-level safeguards approaches, development of safeguards approaches, equipment and technologies, cooperation with states on safeguards matters, including our efforts to help enhancing states' capabilities to implement safeguards at the national level. Preparation for the future to respond to changes in the operating environment and challenges, management and resources. From this perspective, the DG statement and the background paper on safeguards that will be submitted to the REFCON are very useful resources that may be used by states parties to articulate recommendations related to safeguards, inter alia to support the agency's activities and efforts aimed at strengthening the effectiveness and improving the efficiency of safeguards. In addition, the safeguards resolutions adopted by the General Conference on and the last one was adopted in September last year by the 64th regular session of the General Conference could also be used in this regard. At all review conferences, irrespective of the outcome, states parties have expressed strong support for the verification work of the agency, and their recommendations related to safeguards under the Pillar 2 have been crafted and agreed with that aim in mind. Given the increase of the agency's safeguards responsibilities, strengthening further the effectiveness of safeguards now and in the future needs solid legal authority, enhanced cooperation with states and their authorities responsible for safeguards implementation, as well as states' political, technical, and financial support. And given the constraints of time, I want to stop here. And I thank you very much for inviting the agency to address this event.
Thank you very much, Unit. I also have a small question for you. The current Director General, as well as his two previous predecessors, have both emphasized that all remaining states that have not yet rescinded or amended their small quantities protocol do so, and also to bring into force additional protocols. And I was wondering whether this is something that the Iaea would again emphasize at the review conference. And related to my question to Ambassador Clement, in 2004, I started this practice in Main Committee 2 of giving a technical briefing on safeguards, because many of the delegates there are not from Vienna and didn't really have a good understanding. And so I was wondering whether the agency might think about doing the same at the next review conference. Thank you. We can't hear you. Can you unmute
yourself, Mr. Suzna?
Okay. So the DG informed the states of his initiative in September last year. He wrote letters, he sent letters to all states, 31 states with SQPs based on the original text, and call upon them to amend or rescind such SQPs in line with the board decision of 2005. And so far, we received positive replies from states. So that information will be updated in our background paper to be submitted to the REFCON. In addition, the DG also sent letters to remaining states parties that have yet to bring into force comprehensive safeguards agreements required by Article 3 of the NPT. As you may know, so in his introductory statements to the board, the DG is calling upon the remaining states to bring into force comprehensive safeguards agreements, and also those with all the SQPs to amend or rescind them accordingly.
Okay, thank you very much, Unit. And now we move on to peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which is Pillar 3. And I'm very pleased to invite one of our co-sponsors, Ambassador Benno Lagner of the Permanent Mission of Switzerland, for us to hear his comments.
Thank you, Tariq, for organizing this meeting. And let me also thank Atomic Reporters for hosting it, and also thank my colleagues from Austria and Kazakhstan for being co-sponsors of this event. It is sometimes said that the third pillar of the NPT does not receive the attention it deserves during review conferences. Why is this the case? Is it maybe due to the fact that it is the least controversial among the three pillars? Or is it due to other factors? While the NPT sets the overarching legal framework for enjoying the benefits of and facilitating peaceful uses of nuclear energy, the NPT does not have an operational arm. The Iaea, with its technical cooperation program, plays a crucial role for the implementation of Pillar 3. Substantive and detailed discussions on the practical implementation of peaceful uses take place in the IEA's policymaking organs, and only to a very limited extent in the NPT context. The IEA's activities are undertaken pursuant to its mandate derived from its statute. It does not act under the authority of the NPT, and its technical assistance has already been provided long before the entry into force of the NPT. In my view, the review conference should not attempt to renegotiate what has already been agreed in the IEA context. Rather, the review conference should rally support for and reinforce the IEA's activities in this area. For instance, the outcome document could also make use of language already negotiated and agreed within the IEA context. For instance, language that can be found in the Ministerial Declaration of the 2018 Ministerial Conference on Nuclear Science and Technology that covers a broad range of aspects related to peaceful nuclear applications. Now, it is impossible to address the issue of peaceful uses in a comprehensive manner within the time allocated, so I would just mention 6 points that I consider important or that I would expect to be raised in the context of the discussions on a final document of the outcome conference. First, the outcome document should reaffirm the inalienable right of states parties to the peaceful use of nuclear energy as enshrined in Article 4 of the NPT. This inalienable right and the undertaking to facilitate the transfer of nuclear technology for peaceful purposes is central to the grand bargain that lies at the heart of the NPT. This would also be in line with a general political recommitment to the treaty, also in the other pillars. Second, while we in Vienna are familiar with the diverse range of nuclear power and non-power applications, many of our colleagues not dealing with the IEA, and namely those working in the development cooperation sector, are not aware of the significant contribution that the activities of the IEA make to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. This link should be highlighted and made visible in the outcome document. For instance, by calling on states parties to promote greater dialogue and exchange between their nuclear and development cooperation communities, by encouraging states parties to include peaceful uses in their national development agendas and frameworks, and by encouraging those states parties that provide development assistance to support activities in the area of peaceful uses with ODA funding. Third, it is in our common interest that peaceful uses are accompanied by the highest levels of nuclear safety and security. The outcome document should therefore reinforce the international normative framework of both safety and security. It should include recommendations encouraging those states parties that have not yet done so to ratify the relevant conventions in the area of nuclear safety and security, and encourage all parties to these conventions to fulfill their obligations under the conventions and to participate actively in the upcoming review meetings of the CNS and Joint Convention and the review conference of the parties to the amendment to the CPPNM. In line with strengthening nuclear safety and security, and while recognizing that these are national responsibilities, the outcome document should furthermore recommend that states parties make use of the safety standards and security guidance developed within the IAEA, and also encourage states parties to make use of the IAEA's advisory services and peer review missions. Fourth, the outcome document should recommend continued efforts to further enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of the IAEA's technical cooperation program. bearing in mind the need to ensure sufficient, assured and predictable resources for the IAEA's technical cooperation activities, the outcome document should call upon states parties to meet their commitments to the Technical Cooperation Fund in full and on time. A fifth point on additional funding. The 2010 outcome document contained a recommendation to support the Peaceful Users Initiative. There have been some ideas discussed on launching at this review conference a new initiative, possibly including also a fund to support increased access to peaceful users. I think we have to bear in mind that all countries, including donor countries, have been severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It would seem to me, therefore, more realistic to consolidate the existing mechanisms. The outcome document could therefore recognize the success of the PUI and encourage states parties to continue contributing to this existing initiative. Finally, and this is my last point, it is important to remind ourselves that peaceful users take place in a multi-stakeholder environment, involving a diverse set of actors, besides government authorities, including, for instance, technology holders, scientific institutes, or industry. These non-governmental stakeholders have a lot of expertise and experience to share on peaceful users. The outcome document should therefore invite states parties to engage with industry and other stakeholders in the framework of the NPT review cycle. This could be done, for instance, at a PrepCom in one of the sessions reserved for the discussion of specific issues under Cluster 3. And I'll leave it there. Thank you once again for organizing this, Tariq, and a pleasure to be part of this event.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lagner. I fully agree with the 6 points that you made. I'm very glad that you also mentioned at the beginning of your talk that we should try not to renegotiate agreements that have already been reached on various issues at the IAEA on nuclear power, non-power applications, transport, safety, and security. So I had one question for you. As you know, there is this ongoing debate of so-called balance between funding for safeguards and funding for peaceful uses. When I was at the agency, then Director General El-Baradei would respond to this by saying that for him, balance meant that the agency has sufficient funding for its requirements for safeguards and sufficient funding for requirements for peaceful uses. And there need not be a euro for euro balance between the two funding requirements. And I was wondering what your views might be on this issue, quote unquote, of balance.
Well, as I said, I don't think we should really sort of take the policy discussions that are taking place in the policy-making organs of the IAEA into the NPT context. Right. We should reinforce some certain elements, which is why I mentioned Technical Cooperation Fund. We have had this, I think, also in previous outcome documents, the need to contribute, make the contributions to the TCF. So I would sort of more see it looking at the funding issue within the area of peaceful users, but not trying to seek balance or looking at how is it balanced with other areas. I think that would be too complicated. And as I said, we don't need to replicate the discussions we've had in the agency's policymaking organs, also in the context of the review conference.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ambassador Lagner. And now we move on to regional issues. Regional issues are discussed at the review conference under the framework of Main Committee 2. One of the key regional issues relates to the Middle East, and in particular, the implementation of the 1995 resolution on establishing a zone free of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction in the region of the Middle East. This was one part of the overall bargain that enabled indefinite extension of the NPT, which is why we are here today and the treaty survives. So I'm very pleased to invite Ambassador Mohammed Al-Mola, Permanent Representative of Egypt to international organizations here in Vienna.
I thank you, Tariq. And I also thank the co-organizers, Austria, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland, for organizing this event on such timely and important issue, promoting successful outcome of the 2021 RevCon. It would be safe to start by saying that the upcoming RevCon of 2020, which was postponed to August 2021, carries at least a symbolic significance, as it originally marked the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the treaty, the 25th anniversary since its indefinite extension. Accordingly, as we reflect upon the implementation of the NPT in the past 5 years, we must be cognizant that with the successes, failure, and disappointment that the NPT and the process emanating from it entails, the upcoming NPT review cycle will carry with it additional significance for the states parties, especially in light of the fact that the previous NPT Review Conference failed to adopt a final outcome. And this will mean that should the upcoming RevCon, God forbid, fail to adopt an outcome document, it will be the first time that 2 consecutive NPT Review Conferences fail to do so, a potential indicator that reaching consensus within the framework of NPT is becoming ever so elusive, requiring over a decade to achieve. Adding insult to injury is the fact that the current global security situation has been rapidly deteriorating. Multilateral and bilateral disarmament machinery were truly under fire, as was evident from the plethora of events we witnessed during the past 5 years regarding the lack of implementation of Article 6 of the treaty. A situation that does not seem to improve amid signals that an alarming trend of increasing nuclear armaments and proliferation among certain states shall continue unabated. This leads Egypt to believe that both the disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation regimes are suffering, as they witness alarming regressions due to the lack of genuine political will to achieve progress on these issues. This was evidenced by the most recent announcement regarding intentions to expand and upgrade nuclear arsenals, which clearly contravenes the obligations under the treaty and the outcome of the several review conferences. This deteriorating global security environment was further compounded by reports that a non-signatory state to the NPT is rapidly expanding its unsafeguarded nuclear facilities as well, further reaffirming the need for the NPT universalization. Nonetheless, it is also important to highlight a number of positive indicators throughout the past several years, namely the humanitarian initiative, which culminated in the adoption of the humanitarian pledge, in addition to the entry into force of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which enshrines into a body of law the existing norms against the use and possession of nuclear weapons, a historical step that is long overdue despite the opposition it faces from several states, namely nuclear weapon states and umbrella states that ostensibly have committed themselves to nuclear disarmament. Having said that, the question remains as to how states parties intend to address these aforementioned challenges while encouraging the positive breakthroughs through adopting concrete action. In the same context, I would like to refer specifically to the challenges regarding the implementation of the 1995 resolution on the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zone and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and possible pathways forward. In this regard, it is imperative to note that the call to establish a free zone in the Middle East was headed by Egypt and the Arab states since 1974 through the United Nations General Assembly. This call was later unanimously adopted in 1980, thereby constituting a common international denominator on this issue. To further support this goal, Egypt pronounced a more inclusive vision in 1990 to expand the scope of the nuclear weapon-free zone to include all weapons of mass destruction in an attempt to genuinely address any concerns of all states in the Middle East. The attempts to establish the nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East were primarily focusing on the track of the NPT review process, which produced a number of substantive documents aimed towards achieving this end, most notably the Middle East resolution, upon which the NPT was indefinitely extended without a vote in 1995, which is considered as an inseparable cornerstone of the indefinite extension of the NPT and regrettably a promise that is yet to be fulfilled. Furthermore, the failure to convene the conference in 2012 to establish the free zone in the Middle East is in accordance with the 2010 Action Plan of the NPT Review led to a frustrating impasse with regards to achieving the outlined goal. This situation was compounded by the lack of positive response to the initiative Egypt launched in 2013, inviting all the states of the Middle East to deposit instruments of their ratifications to the main WMD's legal instrument. Moreover, the aforementioned frustration was further aggravated by the paradoxical position of the three states in the 2015 NPT Review Conference to reach a consensus on new measures regarding implementation of the 1995 resolution, whereby these states blocked consensus on the issue. Consequently, in an attempt to overcome the lack of progress on the implementation of 1995 resolution, the group of Arab states put forth an initiative to the General Assembly Decision 74/546, 2018, to convene a conference under the auspices of the GA with the 1995 NPT resolution as its terms of reference, to elaborate a legally binding instrument establishing a free zone in the region, while simultaneously offloading some of the pressure that is experienced in the NPT Review due to that very issue. In this respect, the results of the first session of the conference, which was presided by Jordan, were a clear testament to its success in achieving the intended purposes. The launch of the Middle East Conference process does not mean that it removes the burden of responsibility from the nuclear weapon states and that the depositories of the 1995 NPT Middle East resolution fulfill their promises in this regard. Rather, it is complementary and supportive to the NPT process, to the depository's role and obligations in this regard. Accordingly, in light of the aforementioned factors, the upcoming NPT Review should take the following measures with regards to the implementation of the 1995 resolution, which we believe is the fourth pillar of the NPT. First, Egypt is of the view that the RevCon should be convened in a full-fledged format in order to provide an enabling environment for a thorough and complete review for all the issues at hand, given the nature and scope of the conflict. Second, the outcome document of the RevCon should take stock of all endeavors and initiatives regarding the implementation of the 1995 Middle East resolution since its last review cycle. It should also ensure that NPT states parties reiterate their commitment to their existing obligations in this respect. Third, the RevCon should ensure that its final outcome document reflects the political will by all concerned states to implement the 1995 resolution and agree on further concrete steps towards this end. Fourth, the RevCon should not only include positive reference to the Middle East Conference and the UN Secretary General's report to the NPT on its session in its final document, it should also take the necessary measures to encourage the continuation of this process, call upon all invited states to participate in its sessions in earnest. In this respect, it is our conviction that the conference and its outcome should be acknowledged by the NPT parties, given the value added by the process it has launched. Having said that, Egypt believes that the consideration and adoption of the aforementioned elements can be conducive to the effective implementation of the 1995 resolution, thereby paving the way for a stronger NPT and opening the door for the exploration of methods to further implementation, which is especially important seeing as the goals set out by the 1995 Middle East resolution have yet to be fulfilled even after 26 years of its adoption. In the same vein, we also look for the presidency of the upcoming conference to play a role in harmonizing efforts and aspirations of the states party. We therefore have full confidence in the president's role and wisdom in this regard, bearing in mind that he has already exerted commendable efforts for the past 2 years under very difficult circumstances. Ultimately, we must remain vigilant that the road ahead is not an easy one, for it is a process that brings with it a number of challenges which require considerable flexibility and genuine political will to navigate successfully. In conclusion, I would like to leave you with one final thought on this issue. You see, after the adoption of 1995 Middle East resolution on the establishment of a zone free of nuclear weapon and other weapons of mass destruction in the region, out of the 22 Arab states, 5 joined the NPT, 20 joined the Chemical Weapons Convention, and 6 joined the Biological Weapons Convention. Many of these states did so based on their belief in the promise made by the 1995 Middle East resolution and its co-sponsors that this would eventually expedite the process of establishing the Middle East zone. Regrettably, however, these steps were taken in exchange for no tangible results, and even 26 years on, the promise that was once made is yet to be met. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Al-Mola. The Middle East, along with nuclear disarmament, is one of the so-called 2 hot ticket issues at the review conference. I had a couple of questions for you, one on substance and one on procedure. In 2000, when I was with the Canadian delegation, I worked with Ambassador Westdahl. He chaired a subsidiary body that dealt with the Middle East. And as you know, in 2010, there was also a subsidiary body that dealt with the Middle East issue. So would Egypt and the Arab states propose or favor that in Main Committee 2, a subsidiary body be established to address the issue of the implementation of the 1995 Middle East resolution with the view to producing some text for inclusion in the final document? And secondly, following the 2000 NPT Review Conference, or the 1995 Middle East resolution in the NPT includes a paragraph which calls upon all appropriate fora to also work towards the establishment of this zone. So in September of 2000, the Iaea General Conference adopted a decision to hold a forum on the experience of other nuclear weapon-free zones relevant for the Middle East, and Director General Al-Baradei put me in charge of it. So this forum was held in 2011, so that's 10 years now. So I was wondering whether you think, since the Iaea is also an appropriate forum, given that it has this issue application of safeguards in the Middle East, to have another technical forum on the experience of other zones that could feed in both to the NPT process and also to the UN General Assembly conference process. Thank you.
Well, I thank you so much for the 2 questions. Concerning the first question on the subsidiary body, it has been established as a practice now and under the auspices of the president of the conference. I still recall in 2015 we had those subsidiary bodies related to both issues, the nuclear weapon-free zone and at the same time the nuclear disarmament. So when it comes to the issue of how the dynamics of how we will discuss taking our work forward during the conference, I think Egypt will be very much responsive and open to any suggestions in relation to any subsidiary bodies that can assist us to discuss reasonably and smoothly the issues at hand. On the other issue concerning the experience of the free zones and how the Middle East can benefit from it, let me tell you that we are so much supportive to this idea of having a role for any of the international organizations that can help in promoting for this, including the IAEA. And at the same time, I have to tell you that within the conference on the Middle East, this issue has been given quite a good consideration. I have been involved in one of the preparatory meetings for the conference that is supposed to be held in the second round of the conference that is supposed to be held in November this year. And big portion of the discussions were on how to benefit from existing experience and good practices when it comes to nuclear weapon-free zones. So for Egypt, rest assured that we will come to those ideas with open heart and mind. And I thank you, Tariq, for posing the two questions and the idea of the subsidiary body to discuss, to have more focus on the issue of the Middle East, try to reach some sort of consensus on the outcome when it comes to this issue.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I didn't want to disagree with you, but the authority for establishing subsidiary bodies and the main committees comes from Decision 1 in 1995 and reaffirmed at the 2000 conference. So while the president appoints the subsidiary bodies and the chairs, the authority for that comes from the strengthened review process adopted by all states parties. So the subsidiary body then is part of the review process. So this is a general comment for everyone. So thank you very much, Ambassador Al-Mola.
Thank you.
And thank you. So now we move on to
Tariq, you need to unmute yourself.
Can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you. So Ambassador Al-Mola, thank you very much for your comments. And now we move on to the second regional issue, which is also discussed under Main Committee 2, and that is the Korean Peninsula and the Dprk. The Dprk is the only country that formally withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty in January 2003. Iaea reports have stated that the agency has never been able to fully verify North Korea's nuclear program during the period when it was a party to the NPT, and even subsequently under the agreed framework, the six-party talks and other regional arrangements that had been made. So I'm very pleased to invite Ambassador Takeshi Hikihara, Permanent Representative of Japan in Vienna, for his views on the Korean Peninsula and the Dprk.
Can you hear me, Tariq?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to this important event. And also my thanks goes to the organizing countries, Austria, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland, to realize this very important event. It is a great honor for me to be a part of this discussion. 50 years has passed since the entry into force of the NPT, and the NPT has greatly contributed to the maintenance and improvement of international peace and security. This is a basic fact. But it is also a reality that there are many still issues which remain pending, especially in the area of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So we need to seek realistic efforts with the cooperation of both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. The NPT is a cornerstone of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, and as such, we have to maintain and strengthen this important treaty. It is imperative to maintain the commitments made so far, and based on that, at the next NPT Review Conference, we should try to achieve an outcome where the three pillars, including nuclear disarmament, are strengthened in a well-balanced manner. To achieve a meaningful outcome at the upcoming review conference, it is important to find a concrete measures and a common understanding which enable all NPT member states to cooperate and move forward. And this with due regards to the current international security environment. Regional issues can often be the key topics for the success of the review conference. Therefore, I'd like to share with you some thoughts with regard to the current situation on North Korea's nuclear capabilities and missile issues. This is a long-standing problem, and it is good to know about its history to think about the current situation, current problem, and the possible solution for that. North Korea has become a party to the NPT in 1985 and concluded a safeguard arrangement with Iaea in 1992. However, after refusing its special inspection, North Korea announced its decision to withdraw from the NPT in March 1993. This was the beginning of what we call the first nuclear crisis of North Korea. As the international community unitedly supported the effort to solve the issue through negotiation by the United States and North Korea announced the suspension of the withdrawal at the US-North Korea joint statement in June of the same year. So this first crisis was relatively short. In October 1994, the agreed framework between the United States and the Dprk was established. However, the reports about a clandestine uranium enrichment program led to the second nuclear crisis of North Korea. North Korea announced its withdrawal from the NPT in January 2003 and has conducted 6 nuclear tests altogether between 2006 and 2017. Needless to say, it is only North Korea that has conducted the nuclear test in the 21st century. Under these circumstances, the final document of the NPT Review Conference in the year 2000 called upon North Korea to come into full compliance with the safeguard agreement. The outcome document of the 2010 NPT Review Conference criticized North Korea's nuclear test, announced that it cannot have the status of a nuclear weapon state in accordance with NPT, and recalled the importance of implementing relevant UN Security Council resolutions. This outcome document also recalled the implementation of the September 2005 joint statement of the six-party talks, early resumption of the six-party talks, early return to the NPT, and the full compliance with the Iaea safeguards agreement. During the NPT review conferences, both in 2005 and 2015, a final document was not adopted due to lack of consensus on certain issues. But there was an agreement on the message regarding North Korea. I myself attended the 2015 NPT review conference, and I recall that participants come to share a common idea on the North Korea issue at a relatively early stage of negotiations. So it is necessary at the next review conference to agree on the appropriate message of North Korea, and for the message to be formalized and communicated to the public, an outcome document as a whole should be also agreed upon. And now North Korea also continued developing ballistic missiles. Its launch of ballistic missile on 25th of the last month is a violation of relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, and is deeply regrettable. These acts threaten peace and security of the region, including Japan, and of the international community. Such launches are also dangerous acts in light of the safety of aircraft and vessels in the surrounding area. Japan has a strong will to cooperate with the international community to achieve complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of all of North Korea's nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, ballistic missiles of all ranges, as well as related programs and facilities in accordance with relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Japan calls upon all states to fully implement relevant UN Security Council resolutions. As I already mentioned, the NPT is the cornerstone of the nuclear disarmament and the non-proliferation regime. It is important to maintain and strengthen the NPT for dealing with the issues of North Korea. In order to strengthen the NPT regime, it is necessary to show the international community's collective engagement. In this context, Japan is also ready to make maximum contributions toward the meaningful outcome at the next review conference. Before concluding, let me add the IAEA safeguards are an essential instrument of the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. For strengthening of the NPT, Japan attaches importance to the universalization of the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement and its additional protocols. We strongly support the IAEA's efforts to make its safeguards more effective and efficient. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hikihara, for your comments. I also wanted to address a question to you. As you mentioned, both the 2000 and the 2010 NPT review conferences called upon North Korea to return to the NPT and to safeguards agreements. What more could this review conference call upon North Korea to do? And can we think of some new initiatives, because the past policies have not really worked? As you pointed out, North Korea is the only country that has carried out nuclear weapon tests in this century, is continuing ballistic missile tests. And we need to find some path of engagement so that we can at least bring this issue on the table to discuss.
Well, thank you so much, Tariq, for a very good question. As to the history of North Korea's nuclear program, spans over 30 years, and various approaches has been taken to find a solution. However, during this period, North Korea announced its withdrawal from the NPT and from the Iaea. It has continued nuclear and missile development, including 6 nuclear tests. To realize the dismantlement of North Korea's WMD and ballistic missiles, it is important first to nail down the entire process toward this end, and then to call upon North Korea to commit to taking concrete actions. This remains an issue that countries concerned should continue to deliberate. Japan remains committed to fully implement relevant UN security resolutions and to seek to realize the denuclearization of North Korea through the close cooperation with countries concerned and with the international community.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Hikihara. We have about 20 minutes for questions from the participants. I invite you to send them in the chat function, and we can then consolidate and address them. In the meantime, while we are waiting for these questions, I was wondering whether any of the speakers would like to make any additional comments or to engage with one or more of the speakers on any of the points that they might have raised. All you need to do is to start speaking, and the Zoom thing, I think, will take care of that. Ambassador Zlauvinen, would you like to say something now? Did you have a question or a comment for any of the speakers?
Not for the time being.
Okay.
I would rather wait for questions.
For the conclusion? All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. So I am still not seeing any comments. So let me just then go down the 3 pillars. Go back to Ambassador Kement. Ambassador Kement, you mentioned in your opening comments that there is still this discussion among or by the nuclear weapon states and countries that rely on defense arrangements underpinned by nuclear weapons, and the continuing position that the TPNW undermines the non-proliferation treaty. And you addressed some of those criticisms, but if we address a couple of their criticisms in detail, one of which is that the TPNW does not include a verification system, and it rather undermines the existing Iaea safeguards system with reference to the additional protocol. And I know you have written about it, and you have a book coming out on the TPNW. So I was wondering whether you could say something on my question, and whether you would like to also say something about your forthcoming book on the TPNW.
Thank you for the opportunity to do some self-promotion of the book. Yes, indeed, I was on a sabbatical for 1.5 years from 2019 until the end of last year, and I've written a book about the history, the development of the humanitarian initiative in the TPNW. So it's called The Treaty Prohibiting Nuclear Weapons: How it was achieved and why it matters, and it will be published next month by Routledge. In that book, I also talk about the sort of different narratives, the counter narratives, and One of them, you've mentioned, is a number of criticisms have been made against the TPNW, and part of the argument that I'm developing is that the criticisms are politically motivated because of it's a contested issue, and what the TPNW really stands for is what I've argued in my presentation, is an engagement on some extremely profound and legitimate security issues. And some of the criticisms that we've heard, let me put it that way. It's easier to criticize aspects of the treaty rather than to engage on some of the more profound questions. Luckily, I think it's a positive development that some of the most egregious accusations that the TPNW would undermine the NPT, that is you hear less that. I think it's seen as grossly confrontational by the TPNW states parties to accuse a country like Ireland, who invented the NPT with the Irish resolution, or South Africa, actually the only country that actually developed nuclear weapons and then gave them up and joined the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state, or Mexico, that was at the heart of the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So to accuse those states that have a completely unblemished NPT implementation record of undermining the NPT is wrong, and so I hope that we will hear less and less of these accusations. Now, on the verification issue, it's very clear the TPNW provides a pathway for the elimination of nuclear weapons. It would have been not serious for the TPNW negotiating states, given that the nuclear armed states boycotted the negotiations, it would not have been serious to go into detailed negotiations of the verification aspects. It provides a framework. It very clearly is in line with the Iaea safeguards regime. It very clearly puts the safeguard standard that the TPNW states parties have at the time of entry into force. It makes them legal, it makes them legally binding, which means that now for the majority of TPNW states parties, the additional protocol has become legally binding. And of course, very clearly for the time when nuclear armed states are ready to join the TPNW, there are two pathways to do that, which of course will have to be dealt with in a technically sound and detailed way once those states join. So I would just hope that given all the political contestation around the TPNW and around nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament in general, that we get to a more factual discussion, that some of the unfounded points stop being made, and we rather engage on those very profound issues about security, humanitarian consequences and risks, and international law that I tried to raise in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. If I might come to Ambassador Benno Lagner on Pillar 3 issues. From your presentation, and as we know at the Iaea, we have these two funds. You mentioned the Technical Cooperation Fund, which is under the statute, even though it is voluntary. And then we have the Peaceful Uses Initiative Fund, which has about 130 million or so euros. But from my understanding, much of the money in the PUI fund is targeted. And by way of history, the idea for the PUI actually came from a commission that Director General Al-Baradei had set up, called the Commission 2020 of Eminent Persons, chaired by the former Mexican ambassador Zedillo, and they proposed a new fund of $50 million. But by the time the money came, we had a new Director General Amano. So my question to you, Ambassador Lagner, is whether you think, since the NPT not only can support the Iaea, but it could also give the Iaea and its member states some ideas of perhaps having another commission 2030 or whatever, that looks at nuclear energy, nuclear applications, and sustainable development, and makes a recommendation to NPT parties, most of whom are also members of the Iaea, to have a sort of a blue ribbon panel or group to come up with some recommendations for peaceful uses, better funding, better understanding, and so on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tariq. As I tried to mention in my presentation, I think it's very difficult to come up with another fund at the moment. We really also need to acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic has severe impacts on the donor countries. So already trying to ensure that the present commitments are met, that the contributions to the TCF are fully paid, I think is important. And we have the PUI. I mean, what is the difference between the PUI and with the TCF? As you said, we have the TCF, voluntary contributions, but they support a program that is decided on by the board. The PUI gives more flexibility to maybe have a more direct targeting of funds. That's actually the nature very often of extra budgetary funds. So I don't think we need a second fund that provides this flexibility for a better targeting of funds. I would keep the PUI as a success story, and we've just had its 10th anniversary last year, and rather build on it and continue it. And it seems to me better to consolidate, and a more realistic option than coming up with the idea of a new fund. We've just had negotiations on the budget in the Iaea context, and we've also seen in the framework of the negotiations on the regular budget that we had a very realistic proposal put forward by the Secretariat, basically a zero real growth budget, just taking into account price adjustment, and this is met with widespread support. So I think we need to be very realistic at present, and it wouldn't serve the purpose of having another fund on paper, but actually not having the money delivered. I would rather consolidate what we have. On the other idea of having a kind of a panel, you mentioned a kind of a panel looking into maybe a new vision for the Iaea. I think this is an initiative that would have to come from the DG if he finds it useful. We have had, of course, such strategic exercises in different bodies in the UN, but I think very much it would be something that the DG would have to initiate if he thinks it could help him in his endeavors.
Thank you very much, Benno. And then if I can come back to Ambassador El-Molla, some of the participants were wondering what would be the consequences should the 10th NPT Review Conference fail to agree on a consensus outcome, regardless of whether they disagreed on the Middle East or nuclear disarmament or some other issue.
Let me say that I have tried in my statement to highlight the consequences of this situation where we spent 2 consecutive NPT RevCons without an outcome. Actually, I was part of 2015 RevCon, and it was quite difficult to reach an outcome. And at the last moment of the conference, some of our partners decided to stop the consensus. I am hopeful that this situation will not be repeated. In a situation that we're facing right now due to the COVID-19, which reminds us of how the world can face huge disasters affecting the lives of each and every single person on the planet, we also need to think of nuclear weapons and getting rid of them, and to renew our commitment as states to implementation of Article 6, to implementation of the previous resolutions, including the 1995. So I'm hopeful that we would not reach to that point where we discuss what will happen if we could not, at the end of the RevCon, agree on a final document. Thank you, Tariq. And let me also, I have to say that I look forward for the book of Ambassador Kemen. I have had the privilege of being with him throughout the process of humanitarian consequences since its inception. And I'm sure that this book will be very telling to the process, and also very eloquent in showing the importance of considering humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapon and acting accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And if I can come back to Ambassador Hikihara again. Japan is the only country that has suffered a nuclear attack and has been active on nuclear disarmament issues. And the Japanese foreign minister set up this group of eminent persons. Could you say what Japan might be considering with regard to this 10th NPT Review Conference on the issue of nuclear disarmament?
Hello. Okay. Thank you so much. Very good question, especially for Japan. Of course, as the only country who have suffered atomic bombing during the war, we believe that Japan has a mission to lead the effort of the international community. And of course, we share the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons. And for that, the NPT is a very, very important issue. There are many ways to support as the unique out of the unique experience of Japan in this context, but perhaps one of the things that we can do is to share our experience. And we can think about the both sides of the problem. On one hand, the very important humanitarian consequences of atomic bombing, and at the same time, Japan is a country who lives in a very real security environment in this part of the world. So we continue to bring our effort to bridge a gap that exists in this discussion. And this is one of the ways to do so is our draft resolution that we are proposing to the UN General Assembly every year, a joint courses of action and future-oriented dialogue toward a world without nuclear weapons. And in that, we convey the reality of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and try to contribute proactively in the international discussion toward the common goal of the elimination of the nuclear weapon. So that's how we try to address the issue. And I think we have a unique position in doing so. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So as we are running out of time, could I now invite Ambassador Gustavo Zlauvinen for his concluding observations, please?
Thank you, Tariq. I've heard all the presentations and the questions and answers, and this reconfirms my strong belief that it's only through a change of views, positions, and dialogues that the 10th Review Conference is going to need to handle all the complex business at hand. It's the only chance we have to get an outcome that will be meaningful for the implementation of the treaty's obligations and the commitments undertaken at previous review conferences. At the end of the day, and I have just to say that obviously talking about success or the lack of success at the review conference has different meanings, and probably as meanings as views are regarding what will constitute success. Whether an overall outcome document adopted by consensus, would that be a success, or separate documents will not, or the lack of documents like in 2015 will be a failure. There are many views about that. What I ask state parties is what they want to have from this review conference in real terms, in concrete measures. I accept that obviously having a consensus document will be probably the norm for success for many, but would that be important? Would be that enough for the international community if after the adoption of an overall document by consensus, state parties were not to fulfill their obligations, who will not to implement whatever is included in that document? So what is more important? To have a nice document adopted by consensus, but no one cares about that, then no one just will follow on whatever it says, or to actually start having state parties implement their obligations under all the three pillars. So I think that that's the fundamental questions that state parties have to address, and they have to decide before going to the review conference, what they want to get from the review conference, what is their national goal. And of course, just each delegation is going to have, always I say, 15 to 20 specific instructions on the different topics under the review, under the purview of the review conference. But just the overall goal, what is going to be. And I think just haven't heard so far a single view from that. I think that we have to put that in context, in the sense that what we have heard today, and I have heard during consultations and many other events, that today the NPT lies at the crossroad of international, national, and human security, and increasingly too on sustainable development and even public health, as we have seen the link between the amazing work done by the Iaea and fighting the pandemic. But unfortunately, since the end of the Cold War and the remarkable achievements in disarmament that occurred in its wake, nuclear weapons seems to largely have disappeared from the front page of our collective global consciousness, obviously with the occasional focus on regional proliferation crisis. And I believe that unfortunately, this is a short-sighted and increasingly dangerous mentality that have to be reverted. So I don't want to wish, I don't want to wish to sound alarmist, but given the current situation, the current environment, there is an increasingly need, an urgent need for all stakeholders to work together to raise awareness of, educate about, and develop solutions to the growing dangers posed by nuclear weapons proliferations, and from the point of view of the actual arsenals by the nuclear weapon states. The 10th Review Conference faces obviously some daunting challenges, and we heard about many of them today. But in my opinion, it is also a chance to realize opportunities, to make an about face on the current trajectory through dialogue, negotiations, and a political willingness to listen and to compromise. I believe that also parties have a role, an important role to play in achieving that, to achieving a meaningful discussions and meaningful engagement at the review conference, and a meaningful outcome to be implemented the day after the review conference closes its business. I think that that's what we have to aim at. But I believe that nuclear weapon states must lead. They have a particular responsibility to implement the obligations, but also to show by example, and they have not done so far. So I think, just as I say, there is cause for concern, and many already believe that the review conference is going to be a failure. But also there is a cause for optimism, regarding the NPT and the 10th Review Conference. And I'm much more inclined to the second. Now, whether the former or the latter triumphs will depend on said parties and their willingness to use the time lead up to the conference to narrow divides, undergird common ground, and work together. And that's my hope, and that's my role. Try to induce that dialogue, induce that engagement, hopefully facilitate, as I say, an outcome that will be meaningful and that will serve the purpose for the implementation of the NPT in the few years ahead. Thank you, Tariq. Thank you to the missions of Austria, Switzerland, and Kazakhstan for organizing this event. It's extremely, extremely educational. And I think that it helps that process of engaging ourselves and listen to each other and decide what we want to get out of this review conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. That was a very good concluding comment. And I'm sure all of us who are taking part in this discussion wish you all the very best and success in your endeavors at the review conference. And as we discussed in another webinar, we need the president to show strong leadership. And having worked with you at the Iaea before, I know you are quite capable of doing that, and we look forward to it. I now invite Ambassador Umarov for his final comments, and then I will do the last wrap up.
Thank you, Derek, very much for giving me the chance to speak. I would like to say, of course, we extend our sincere appreciation to all the speakers today and participants of the workshop. Despite this very interesting current situation, I think that there is a positive tone for the discussion this afternoon. And as I've mentioned during my opening statement, only through cooperative and constructive dialogue, we can really expect a fruitful outcome at the NPT Review Conference. And actually, it's in national interest, security interest of each and every country that we have a good final document setting very much concrete, achievable goals for the three pillars of the NPT, which could really help us all. And I agree with Ambassador Gustavo Zlauvinen that really we need a document, but we need also practical outcomes of it, because everybody is waiting for that. I don't think that it should be another exercise in the political discussions, deliberations with a nice document, but without any achievable goals. It should be a very practical thing which we can work on in the future. And I think that the very right tone which was taken by Ambassador Zlauvinen, that public awareness should be raised about those issues, because public should understand what we're doing on this issue, and their support would be absolutely important in achieving those political goals which we would like to achieve in what we're doing. So we would really need to work with public. We need for people to understand the importance of those discussions. I think lately, because of this tension growing in the international community, general public start understanding what we're talking about, what is the cost of the discussions. So we need to support that. And today's webinar was another attempt to raise this awareness, to work on this issue, to try to come to some meaningful outcome on this. So I would like to thank you all, and of course urge all of us to provide our assistance to President-designate Ambassador Gustavo Zlauvinen to ensure a successful outcome of the RevCon, of coming RevCon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. The Ambassador of Morocco had made a comment with regard to nuclear security, and nuclear security now is an item that is discussed under Main Committee 3. I remember working with Ambassador Stewart in 2015. He was chairing Main Committee 3, and so along with nuclear safety, nuclear security also is an important part of the discussion at the review conference. I would now like to thank the three permanent missions again, Austria, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland, for co-sponsoring this event. I would like to thank all of the speakers, including the president-designate, all of the participants. We apologize that we were not able to cover all of the questions. I would also like to thank my colleagues in Atomic Reporters, and finally to announce that we have another event coming up with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung on the 5th of May on the future of the JCPOA. And with that, I wish you all goodbye, good health, keep safe, and see you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tariq, very much. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. All the best.
Thank you.
All the best.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank
Bye.
you, Tariq.